I braced for impact. My body folded in two, basically. I hit the back of his head with my head. My back exploded. I had all kinds of massive internal injuries and was trapped under the water. I was able to get my lap belt off, take a breath, and then go down for him. And I got down to him and in the cockpit and couldn't get him undone. And statistically, 15% of the people that have that injury make it to the hospital and survive. But then combined with everything else, I was given a less than 3% survival rate if I did survive that surgery. And he said, never in my life have I had somebody come in your condition and survive. He's like, he goes, there's no medical reason that we can explain that you're still here. He's like, you shouldn't be here.
Hello and welcome back to the Toughest Finish Line podcast with me, Jen Dome. How do you keep moving forward when life throws more at you than most people could ever imagine? In this episode, I'm joined by Scott Christmas, whose story is one of extraordinary resilience. Scott has lived through experiences that most of us could barely comprehend, from surviving a plane crash, suffering major injuries, to losing people he loved. Yet through it all, he's remained remarkably positive and dedicated to helping others. This conversation isn't an easy listen at times. It's raw, honest, emotional, and there are moments that are genuinely heartbreaking. But it's also a powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit and what's possible when you choose hope, even in the darkest moments. Scott also shares the promise he made 30 years ago, one he's now determined to fulfill, and why that mission has become such an important part of his life. Let's get into it. So, Scott Christmas, welcome to the Toughest Finish Line podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. And thank you for having me on board.
And I came across your story through the Ironman Foundation, and I was just blown away by everything that you had been through and what you were working towards achieving this year. So I was desperate to have you on for an episode. But I wanted to go back because your story starts a few years ago. And I read somewhere that growing up, you wanted to be in the Marines. Is that right?
I did.
Yeah. So what was it about the Marines that appealed to you so much?
The discipline, the love of country. I mean, I was that guy, hardcore, purposeful in everything I did. But more than anything was my best friend growing up. He was kind of like my big brother. We called him Win, but his full name was Owen Duke. He had gone off to the Naval Academy in 1987, the year that I graduated from high school. And, but he'd gone off, I guess, in 84. And joined the Naval Academy with the hopes of becoming a Marine aviator. And so, I was always kind of, following in his footsteps. We were attached at the hip. And so that's what I was really trying to do. So following his lead, so we could serve together and, share our stories together and travel the world together. So, two
Love that.
brothers. Yeah.
Yeah, brothers doing it together. And we're going to talk about Owen, obviously, a lot more
Yeah.
through your
Yeah.
story. But that career dream came to a bit of a stop, didn't it? After something that happened in a bar? Are you
It
able to
did. So,
explain what
yes.
happened there?
So in 1990, I was at the time 6'3", 230 pounds, solid as a rock, shaved head, and, young and youthful, had just turned 21 in the bars, probably drinking too much, hanging out with, a bunch of wannabe jarheads or jarheads, as what, we call the Marines. And a bar fight ensued, and the person that I got in a fight with picked up a long neck and cracked it across my forehead and stuck it in my left eye and cut my left eye in half. And so basically the eye fell out of the socket almost, and my eyelid was cut off, and I had a huge gaping wound on my forehead. And so walked in the bathroom, and a friend of mine that was in the bar with me walked in and said it looked like the Terminator when he was removing his fake eye. I was pulling a big old piece of beer bottle out of my left eye and looked at him with just a gaping hole in my forehead and where my eye was, and said I need to go to the hospital. So that effectively ended my career in the Marine Corps at the time. So, I spent the next year in and out of surgeries trying to save what little they could of my eye. I mean, it's still my eye, it tracks, but I'm blind in it. I have a little bit of light vision, but if you saw it up close, you could tell. But so yeah, it was a devastating injury at the time. So, and
Yeah.
here we are. So,
Absolutely
yeah.
devastating, and just one kind of freak event that completely transformed your plans, and as you said, you had all these plans for being in the Marines and going
Yeah.
forwards, and I mean, that in itself is a traumatic experience, let alone what we're gonna come on to talk about in more detail, but obviously physically, I mean, you mentioned the surgeries there, but emotionally, how did you deal with that at the time?
So, at age 21, when, all your dreams and aspirations come crashing down in such a violent way, also, as a very physical person who was always into working out, running, stuff like that. I was pretty much numb when it happened. I mean, anybody who's sustained trauma, whether injuries or somehow or another, you're faced with a new reality. I mean, to this day, I look in the mirror and I see something. Now I recognize them, but back in the day, I'm looking in the mirror and I'm seeing, half of my face. The other half I'm not. It's mine, but it's not moving. I mean, you'll see me doing this broadcast every now and then, pop my eyelid up because it gets lazy and falls down. But I was in and out of surgery for, God, I had two major surgeries pretty quickly. And then, a year later had a muscle realignment surgery because when the bottle cut my eye, cut off the muscles also. It pulled everything inside the eye out. So your iris or your eyes blue or brown, or it
Bit
pulled
of a
my
mix.
iris out. Okay. So it pulled mine out from 12 to from 4 o'clock to 12 o'clock. So any light that I do see, I have to close my eye typically because it's I don't have an iris closing it up. You're just looking straight at what's left of my my retina. And so but at the time, emotionally, devastating. I mean, just didn't know what I was going to do with my life then. That's all I ever wanted to do. So, and, so that was kind of it was a tough thing to go through. I mean, it really was. I mean, I guess, you wake up, it's like anything, whether the death of a person or an injury, you go to sleep, hoping it's a bad dream when you wake up, and then eventually you accept the reality of what you're dealing with and how you push forward and move forward with it. So,
Yeah, and I know kind of looking at your story and reading up on what you've been through, that obviously that is a horrific, horrific incident that happened. But you found, was it right that you found triathlon at this point, and it was sport and fitness helped you a little bit through?
yeah, it really did. So, the honest answer is, I mean, whether you call it PTSD or whatever you want to call it, you didn't want to sleep. So I'd get up in the middle of the night and go run. And as I was telling somebody that I ran into at an event that we'll connect to later, I can almost run a mile straight with my right eye closed because at the time I was just training myself in case something else happened. I would run in the middle of the night, and so that kind of became my outlet, working out and running, which I already did anyway, to expend that energy that I was putting all towards going into the Marine Corps and, and pursuing that career. And then just one day, my other best friend, Jeff Conrad, he just asked me to do a triathlon one day in 1990. And it was a little quarter-mile swim and a 10-mile bike and a 3-mile run. And I was like, sure, you can do that. It's no problem. About died on the swim, on the bike. I mean, at the time, 10 miles, like, holy cow, this is hard. And then, running the run. And then we thought we were the greatest thing since sliced bread. It was, we started doing them before triathlons were the cool things to do. It was kind of a magical era of the triathlon community also. So we just kind of really dove into that. And that became really my outlet. I mean, something to pursue, something to take my mind off of it.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
love it. So, from that regard. So it was very healing for me.
yeah.
And then after that, we just, we always kind of looked at, we showed up in board shorts, and I'm looking at these guys back in the day, Speedos shaved down. And I was like, what have you brought me to, Jeff? Within a year, we're those guys, lean and mean and, shaved down and wearing Speedos racing back in the era. So we
Oh,
embraced it fully. So yeah, it
yeah.
was a magical time. So, and very healing for me.
Yeah, and I love that you had that after such a life-changing incident that was
Yeah.
so traumatic. And, we talk about a lot on this program about how sport and things can help you through that. And it clearly did at that point
Yeah.
help you through that time. And I'd like to say that that was the only incident that went through that you went through in your life, because that is traumatic in itself. But there was another really life changing experience that you went through in 1996, linking back to Owen, who you referenced at the beginning. Are you happy to talk us through just what happened with
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
plane
Yeah.
crash?
Absolutely. So in 1996, my best friend, Win Duke, his name was Owen Duke. He had just graduated from the Naval Academy at 87 as class president, gone off into the Marine Corps to fly helicopters, was an active duty helicopter pilot. He had just done a station, a duty, a rotation in North Carolina with the Special Forces, and then he had bought his own seaplane and was hopscotching cross country. I mean, everybody knew him. Back pre cell phones, he had a Rolodex, and he'd just write down people's names. And we both grew up in Mobile, Alabama, and he stopped in to hang out with me for the weekend, go to the Blue Angels show, and take us for a ride before he kept on his trek to Seattle. And there's a body of water that we live on called Mobile Bay, and then you have Mobile on one side, Fairhope, where I live now, on the other, and then a little body of water off Mobile Bay called Weeks Bay. Well, it was July 15th of 1996, and there's a lot of tentacles to the story. The next day, he was going to continue his journey, and he wanted me to go fly. And he had spent the whole week taking everybody up. And the honest answer is, I really didn't want to go. You know, I didn't want to go. He was I knew he was a good pilot, but I'd crashed a small plane 3 years prior, right down the road from where I live now, and up in off Mobile Bay, a biplane that a friend of mine and I'd cartwheeled trying to land, and we walked away from that one. So I got off work and delayed and delayed and delayed. Went for a long run. Um, and so then we took off and went on a route that we call the Around the Bay ride, and landed in Weeks Bay and refueled our plane. And right after we refueled, Wynn said, "You want to sit up front and fly us home?" And because he knew that I wanted to pursue a career in the Marine Corps, just like him, and fly. And I was like, "That's okay." Last time I was on the front seat of a small plane, we crashed. Referencing the crash 3 years prior. And so Wynn climbed in the front. He had a 6-point harness in. I climbed over his seat. You kind of folded it like a car, and sat down and had a lap belt on. And we took off, and it was an underpowered craft for floats. Now, what most people don't know is there's a whole community of seaplanes out there that are people that have taken Cessnas, Pipers, all different Rangers, and cut the wheels off and retrofitted them with floats. It's a whole little cult following. So he had a habit of getting up to about 500 feet and nosing it down to pull up and get lift faster. So because it was unpowered, and he keyed the mic and said, "Ready to go up?" I said, "Roger that." We nosed it down and pulled up. And at about 1,000 feet, they estimated, we rolled over and corkscrewed straight in, stalled out, corkscrewed straight into about 6 feet of water, estimated 100 miles per hour. Like straight in. You're in the back bracing for impact. Right at the last second, wind did everything you do in those situations. You throttle back and you just keep it nose down till you can get airspeed, and slowly pull out of it. But anything under 1,000 feet, especially with floats, you're going in. And so we hit the water, 100 miles per hour, and that's hitting concrete. And so the plane drilled into the mud underneath, everything folded up. Just the massive, horrific impact of it all. I braced for impact. My body folded in two, basically. I hit the back of his head with my head. My back, exploded. I had all kinds of massive internal injuries, and was trapped under the water, and was able to get my lap belt off, stayed conscious throughout the whole thing, was able to get my lap belt off, take a breath, and then go down for him. And because he was grabbing for me, and I got down to him and in the cockpit, and couldn't get him undone. And so he officially drowned, but he took a real bad headshot. But we're holding on to each other, and just couldn't get him free. And so then after that, I got back up to the air pocket, and I knew he was gone. And I was in the golden hour is what they call it. So I was actively dying. And so I was, fading in and out of consciousness, trying to hold my head up above water, bleeding out through massive internal injuries. We had just topped off the tanks. And so we had marine grade fuel that's sitting in the water, and it burns you if you sit in it too long. So I had chemical burns over my entire body, and a lot of weird things happened that day. There was only one boat on the body of water that day that happened to be three guys that had skipped work, and one happened to be a retired airborne special forces medic. So that was the only boat, right? And they saw when we took off, they threw their poles in and started heading our way. And there was only one phone call made that day, and it was a guy sitting on his porch watching the whole thing. And so by the time they got to me, the first guy that went through the door, he saw Wynn hanging in his straps, and that kind of really messed him up. And the second guy climbed up in the fuselage. And remember, I'm in shock, but I'm fully conscious, blind in my left eye. So, somebody always comes up to me. You just don't know who's there. And so, and I'm just sitting there, fading in and out. And so he climbed up in there, the special forces medic, and waited till I relaxed because I'm still a pretty big guy back then, 6'3", back then, probably 205. Um, and he waited till I just relaxed and bear hugged me and took my headset and hog tied me and kicked my mouth shut and pulled me through and got me in the boat. At that point, the guy that had made the phone call on shore, he had already had fire rescue, EMS, state troopers, everybody staged in his yard and route. And so as he, tells the story, they tell the story. As soon as they saw, he was screaming for them to come over to his house, and the airborne medic said, "We need a helicopter." And all the angels were in play. I mean, it's a God wink. Our level one trauma center, USA Health in Mobile, their helicopter just happened to be right down the road getting airtime in. So they touched down and picked me up and put me in. And, I was completely conscious. And Scott Hunter was the flight nurse. And I kept on asking him, is my right leg attached? Is my right leg attached? Because I'd broken my back so badly that I didn't think my leg was attached. And he said, it's attached. It's attached. We got to get you under control. Just hold tight, buddy." And I said, "Am I paralyzed? Am I paralyzed?" And I kept pulling him closer. I'm like, "Come on, man, tell me the truth. Am I paralyzed?" And, at the same time I'm yelling, "My buddy's still in there. My buddy's still in there. My buddy's still in there." And he's like, "I don't know anybody else. We've got you. They're working on whoever else is in there." Um, I said, "I'm on fire. I'm on fire because marine grade fuel, if it sits on your skin too long, it'll just, you'll burn from, you just fry." And so had second degree chemical burns over 80% of my body. My back was on fire from where I broke it so bad. My stomach was distended where I was bleeding out. The only visual injuries I had is my wrist had exploded from the tight grip on the side of the plane. My foot had folded in two, and then I had a bad laceration on the back of my head where they now say that I probably hit the back of Wynn's head, and hit his head. Um, so then, I'm very good in those situations for whatever reason. God made me good in those situations. I'm pretty level headed, and maybe it's because I've had a lot of them. And so I said, "Where are y'all taking me?" And he said, "USA." I'm like, my other best friend, Jeff Conrad, who I started doing triathlons with, Dr. Conrad's on there, my roommate, he's like, "I know Dr. Conrad." And he said, so as the side story goes, they called Jeff, who was coming home to our apartment to change, and they paged him, and he said, "I'm not on call." And they said, "We need you back at the helipad." And he's like, "I'm not on call." And they said, "Hold on, we're going to patch you through the helicopter." And Scott told him, "Hey, we're bringing Christmas in." And he's like, "What about Wynn?" And he said, "All I know is he's the only one that made it." We got into the ER, and I was conscious the whole time. You're strapped to a board. I mean, the one thing I remember from that day more than anything of that was just the noise from the helicopter and the searing heat from the time and, the year, the month that we were in, and then just the smell of fuel, fuel and death. And they brought me in and they said, "Look, if we don't operate on you right now, you are going to die. We have to operate." So they did emergency surgery, opened up my belly from sternum all the way down. That's what it's called, a laparotomy. They just flay you open and go in. And I was actively bleeding out through a ruptured spleen. And that's common of lap belts. That's why they got rid of lap belts in America. I
Right.
mean, because you fold in two. I had liver and kidney damage. So that was the immediate, concern. So I ended up having, from that surgery and the next one that I'll tell you about, over 100 units of blood transfused. So human body holds anywhere from 8 to 12 units. So that tells you they were fighting to keep me alive. That alone was kind of a miracle. We drained all the blood banks from my type blood in the area because they were just kept bringing them in, pushing them through. I mean, I'm in medical sales now. They think it's a big deal when somebody's pushing 4 units. I mean, so I'm like, when you get to 100, you can talk to me. But yeah, so that alone was a miracle in itself. But then, so I had a ruptured spleen, kidney and liver damage. My foot had folded in two. That's not life threatening. My wrist had, exploded. That's not life threatening. I had 33 shear injuries in my brain, TBIs from the deceleration and the hitting the back of Wynn's head. I had broken my back at L2 with an anterior compression of 70% with a posterior burst and a chance fracture. So, probably one of the worst fractures you can have in your back. And But then a first year surgical resident, while they were working on my belly, walked out and looked at the CTs, and they'd missed it and noticed that I had what's called a wide mediastinum. And your heart and your organs can float around your stomach and chest cavity, but it's a deceleration injury. And so what I had was a completely transected thoracic aorta. I had the Princess Di injury. Exactly what killed her. And statistically, 15% of the people that have that injury make it to the hospital and survive. Less than 15%. You know, given everything else, I was given a less than 5 from that injury alone, but then combined with everything else, I was given a less than 3% survival rate if I did survive that surgery. And the story gets really weird here that, um, they came out and told my parents, he has a bad heart injury. We missed it on the first scans, but we're gonna have to do emergency open heart surgery. Emergency open heart surgery. And they said, "How bad is it?" And they're like, "It's as bad as you get. This is the worst injury you can have." And so my mom had the frame of mind to call a doctor by the name of Gary Rich, whose son was a friend of mine. And he was the head of the private cardiology group in our town, the biggest
Wow.
one and well known. And so she had the frame of mind to call him to ask, what should we do? And so she tried to call Dr. Rich. Now, remember, this is 96, so no cell phones, they're
No.
just coming into play. Well, he wasn't answering his phone. So, she had the pager number for his brother, who was an ophthalmologist who had operated on my eye in 1990. So she paged him. He got up, drove down to his brother's house, woke him up, and he said, "You definitely don't need who's on staff at USA to operate on you. You need a cardiothoracic surgeon by the name of Bill Johnson, who was a private guy." They called up Johnson and he said, "I don't have privileges there." And they said, "You do tonight." And he said, "Well, if I'm coming, I want my new partner, Peter Plush, to come." And so those two guys came in and rolled me over and shut down the heart for 33 minutes. And typically, when you have that injury, like what probably happened to Princess Di, it tears and you just pump out. I mean, that's it. You just, you're gone, and your chest cavity fills up and you just bleed out. And because your aorta is, so massive, mine had not just torn, it completely severed, and a hematoma had held to pull me out of the plane through the laparotomy on my spleen and, my kidney, liver. And it had held long enough for them to catch it and roll me over and, shut me down and put in a big 3-inch Dacron graft that, kind of, that was it. They saved my life. The traumatologist, Seth Eisenberg, is the initial surgeon, that worked on my belly. And then, Peter Plush and Bill Johnson, those three are my heroes. So, and then, after that, I was somebody else, a friend of mine, became good friends. Bent Peterson repaired my foot. They closed my wrist. I was in a drug-induced coma for a little over 2 weeks. Um, and then moved to the hospital floor for about a month, where I coded once due to a surgical error by a surgical resident. Um, and that was, kind of the rest. My body metabolized because I would just come off a big circuit of triathlons. So I was pretty fit.
Mm.
But I was lean also. And so anytime you have burns, your body is going to metabolize because you just can't get enough nutrients. And then you magnify all the fluids they pump into you
Yeah.
during surgery, all the blood. And so my body ate itself. I mean, I lost 60 pounds, they said, in 2 weeks. It just couldn't get enough nutrients. That was why I was in the surgical intensive care unit. Then on the floor, because of the severity of the break in my back, they said they couldn't operate on it. They said that he just wouldn't survive it. I'd been through too much at that point. So the plan was to just brace me and see how it went. And so I was in a hospital bed for a total of 6-7 weeks, and then they finally fit me with a brace and got me home. So then the road to recovery started. So
Wow. I
yeah,
mean,
it's got a lot of weird tentacles to it though. Like the day and my sister gets emotional whenever she tells this story. The day they discharged me, Dr. Frank Roberts came in, a man of great faith, had been a traumatologist he was the number 2 traumatologist on staff. And my sister still gets so choked up over this. He said, "Scott, I've been a traumatologist around the country for 30 years. And he said, never in my life have I had somebody come in your condition and survive." He's like, he goes, "There's no medical reason that we can explain that you're still here." He's like, "You shouldn't be here." He goes, "I don't know what God's purpose for you is." He said, "But, I hope you find it one day, because there's a reason God kept you here." And so, the story takes on all kind of whole life on its own after that. So, and here I am. So,
Yeah. I
um,
mean, it's just I've heard elements of that story before, but oh my
yeah,
goodness, it's just crazy. And actually you think, what happened with your eye meant that your mum had that person's pager number, which got you the best surgeon. And it's,
yeah,
everything happens for a reason. Like you may not know it at the time, and it may be the most traumatic thing, but thank goodness she was able to do that and get you that right support. And it's just such a horrific story, but also one of just sheer wowness is the only word of
yeah.
you shouldn't be alive, but you are sat here today and still talking. And I think one of the things that struck me when I heard you speak elements of this before, but also you saying there is how calm you appeared to be and how you were conscious throughout all of it. Do you remember the element of you coming down? What was running through your head at that point as you're kind of coming down into the crash?
Into the crash. So, I've been in a couple of car crashes before that were totaled, that we walked away from. And, you know, in those situations, and you could probably talk to anybody that's been in a situation like that, time slows down.
Yeah.
It just does. The adrenaline is flowing so much. It's sheer terror for one. Um, everything kind of slows down to the point that you could pick a drop of water when you impact come by. You could pick the wind, the glass shattering. It's almost like a movie scene where it's not real. It's everything just you become so hyper aware. Now, as far as what we were thinking, it was you know not saying it on air. It's, oh, one of those words. I mean, and you're bracing for impact. And it's one thing if you're in a car accident, and it's happening so fast. I mean, when you fall from 1,000 feet, it's realistically not that long, but it is that long.
Yeah.
And because it's not like we were some jet taking off to get to 1,000 feet. We climbed and then we just rolled over. And then the best way to describe it is just sheer terror that this is really about to happen, and you don't know what's going to happen when it happens. But the impact. I mean, Wynn put up his hands right at the last minute. Your world changes just like that. I mean, sheer terror. That's really what it is. But I mean, you are very much hyper aware. It is like watching a slow motion movie transpire. I mean, it's horrific. That's what it
Yeah.
is. Um,
And the fact
so
you even remembering, what Wynne did, and it just shows how present you were. A lot of people lose consciousness in these types of situations and things, but obviously you're kind of remembering it all. And I mean,
Mhm.
so you're lying in hospital. You've been told you would have had 3% chance of survival. You shouldn't be here. You've lost your best friend who you called your brother. You remember it all so much. How did you even begin to get through that time? You've had so many surgeries, burns, all of that. How do you keep moving forwards?
So I think my story is and I'm not naive in that it's a unique story.
Mm,
And there's a lot of aspects to it, but maybe each thing that happened to me prepared me for the next. Does that make
yeah,
sense?
yeah,
Um, I mean, you know, God had a purpose, and He gave me resiliency. That's for sure. But the eye accident. So I dealt with the emotions of what's happened, that your life has changed. I mean, that's a big significant life event when, you lose the vision in your eye and your whole career and aspirations. Then you step forward 6 years later, and now everything that you'd love to do again, triathlons, your best friend, that's all gone. You don't know if you're going to walk again. You don't know if you're going to be in a wheelchair. Um, you know, the most powerful thing that you can give a patient is hope, and you can give that to anybody. That's my favorite word in the whole wide world. Um, you kind of lose that, right? I mean, when you're laying in a hospital bed, and the walls start closing in, and you can't. I mean, I couldn't move unless they came and log rolled me. I mean, they had to move me at the same time because my back. Any wrong movement, was for sure going to be in a wheelchair. Um, but then, so you're pretty much numb, again. But then, throw in, your best friend lost his life. I mean, um, it's a hard journey. I mean, I get choked up about it now, but I mean, here I am, and why isn't he here? You know, why me? But maybe I was, meant to be in that plane because anybody else might not have been strong enough to, survive. I mean, there was a reason I was in there. So with him, and I think the honest answer is the way you make peace with it is it's all part of a plan. I don't know what the plan is. I mean, because mine continued and kind of changed up again. Um, but I mean, somebody like me who's passionate about life and passionate about fitness and all that, it's given me an avenue to keep him alive, and keep that memory alive and to honor his death. I think that one of the hardest days in the hospital was when my dad and my brother had gone up to Arlington, where he was buried with full military honors. All his friends from across the Marine Corps is a real small community, but Navy and Marine Corps were there, so everybody was there, and I never got to see that because I was stuck in a hospital bed trying to fighting for my own life. And but they got to go up there, and that was a hard day though when I was moved to the hospital floor, and my mom showed me the pictures of that, you know flag drawn casket going across those hallowed grounds. I mean, that was hard. It's still hard to think about. So, that was probably the hardest day in the hospital. And then after that, it was just, you know, what do I do now? I mean,
Yeah.
that's what now? I mean, it's kind of like Tom Hanks at the end of the road from Castaway. What now? Which way do I go? Do I go left or right? So, um, and that's really where I was. I mean, I'm 26 at that point, super fit, had worked all those years to get back, loving what I do, triathlon wise and the community that I'm a part of. And, now here I am, faced with the fact, am I ever going to be able to run again, ride a bike again, swim, walk. Um,
Yeah.
but, I mean, there was a lot of God winks that day. The people were in play for whatever reason. And then, but also because of the fitness that I was in, like a friend of mine to this day, he says it, he's like, he came in and his name's Sean Hinton, and he's just a great triathlete, great guy. He came in and I couldn't even open my eyes. And he said, he tells everybody that, Scott shook my hand with his trademark strong grip and smiled. And he said, I knew then he was going to be okay. And he said, he turned to the nurse and said, triathlon save lives. So, that's kind
Absolutely.
of one of our mottos, triathlon save lives. And in my case, they truly did. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, it's obviously was, for the fitness helped you to get through that plane crash and to
yeah.
keep going and keep fighting. So, yeah, I mean, triathlon is obviously a big part of your life, and you've got a big challenge coming up, which we're going to come on to. Um, I just want to talk about kind of the rehabilitation from that, because obviously you've completely smashed your back to pieces.
Mhm.
And so I'm imagining that it was many months, years of rehabilitation.
No, so there's a couple things that happen in the hospital and kind of jump around. I made Win three promises laying there when I saw the casket, silently, and my friends, my parents now know, my family know, and now it's kind of obviously everybody knows. I'd made him three promises that I would return to racing, and um, you know, which I was told I would never. So that I would. The second one was I would not visit Arlington until I could run the Marine Corps marathon, and then afterwards walk over and lay my finisher medal on him, and that would be my first time to visit him. And and having never run a marathon before and being told I would never run again. And then the third was he had been stationed in Hawaii, and that's his favorite place he'd ever been stationed. And I would never go to Hawaii until I could do the Hawaiian Ironman, and then take that finisher medal back to Arlington and do the same. So, I kind of made those three promises, and then, I got out of the hospital, I moved home and in with your parents. That's humbling at 26. I had a TLSO is what they're called. It's a brace from the top of your chest all the way down. You can't move. I had to have that on 24/7 unless I was laying in a bed. My foot was in a cast, my wrist was in a cast. And so I moved in with them, and therapy back in the initial part was you just go and you lay on a bed and, try and lift your leg. And at the time, I'd had such severe nerve damage in my leg that, I mean, my leg was the size of my pinky and my thigh. And so it severely affected my female BMO, is what you called your quad. And I couldn't
Right.
even lift my leg off the table. And so I started rehab with a physical therapist named David Field, and ironically, he was my brother-in-law's one of his best friends, and he was a great guy. So I would lay there on the mat, and he would say, "Lift your leg," and I couldn't do it. And so we do a lot of mobility exercises and stuff like that. And the initial thing was like my scar on my belly from the laparotomy had scarred down so much because I was hunched over a little bit that I couldn't lay back straight because of
Right.
just all the scar tissue. So I remember David got in there one day and got what's called beeswax and just he said, "We got to break that up." And he's just digging into that scar, tears are just rolling down your eyes because he's breaking apart your insides from the outside so you can loosen up that tissue. But then one day he pulled me in and pulled me in his office. He said, "Let's get up, let's go sit in my office and talk." And I was checked out. I mean, I really was. I mean, it was the whole world's upside down. And he goes, "What are we doing here?" And I said, "What do you mean, what are we doing?" And he said, "What are we doing?" I was like, "We're rehabbing." He's like, "No, we're not." He's like, "We're going through the motions." He's like, "Now look, we can go out there every day and I can take your money and we'll go through the motions." He said, "Or you can make a conscious decision that this is the hand you've been dealt and you're going to get better, but it's completely up to you." And so that was, some tough love that came my way. And
Yeah.
he said, "But, I'll do whatever you want to do, but it is 100% in your court at this point. You've got all the resources. It's just going to be up to you." And so, that was, I needed that. I needed a little tough love to, stop having a pity party because um, you can lay in the corner, play dead cockroach all you want, but in the end, the surgeons have put you together. It's up to you, and only you know the limits. Your
Yeah.
body will tell you, and then you push through them. I mean, that's the biggest thing. Because I've done a lot of rehab with ACLs, knee injuries and stuff like that. So we started working out hard, and back then though the initial thing was lift your leg. Then it was lift your leg with a 1 pound ankle weight, lift your leg with a 2 pound ankle weight. Here's somebody who prided himself on being able to throw weights around like it was nothing. Um, the pool got into the pool pretty soon, pretty early on. Pool therapy is the best thing for anybody in rehab because of the low impact,
Yeah.
and you can get there. I had a custom bike that I just built up, my first ever custom triathlon bike, right before the crash. I mean, it was like maybe a month before. It was a custom light speed back in the day, titanium, tri spokes, all this kind of
Wow.
stuff. And so I put that on the trainer at home. So I would do therapy in the morning and then go back to my parents' house and had it on the trainer. And I'd be sitting straight up because I couldn't bend over, and I started riding it, and affectionately nicknamed it the Dukester, which was Wynn's call sign, Dukester. And so I got back on the road with we had a pretty big cycling group. I got back out there pretty early. And so I was back on the road pretty early in October. So I was back riding, pretty aggressively and got pretty strong pretty quick. So then Jeff, who was doing his orthopedic residency, said he was in Grand Rounds one day, and all the doctors that had worked on me and everything, and they said, "Man, we saw like 60 of y'all going down Old Shell Road this morning at 5 a.m. because we had a pretty big group ride." And he said, "Yeah, did y'all see Christmas out there?" And he said, "What? He came in for a follow up?" And they're like, "No, he was on the ride this morning." They're like, "Wait, what?" So got
Amazing.
back pretty quick, and that was a big turning point. That to me was the biggest change, in my rehab at that point in the rehab, to get out there and have some freedom and you know a bike, whether you're an adult or a kid. I mean, it takes you back to your childhood. You are free. It is under your power, and this is your freedom right here. And so that was a big turning point for me. And then fast forward in the spring of 17, with any rehab, you have peaks and valleys.
Yeah.
And I peaked out, and I wasn't climbing anymore. So I'd kind of started sliding down emotionally, and I was back in the valley. Everybody's off doing triathlons and this, that, and the other. And loving riding my bike, and able to work out. And but just kind of I'd plateaued, and there was a couple of weird things that had happened on the day of the crash. So as I was delaying, I went for a long run and then, delayed a little bit longer. And Jeff, in our apartment that we shared, I had a huge bulletin board that I'd take out articles, motivational articles or quotes or this, that. And I'd read one that day about, in the back of Bicycle magazine, about a LA police officer named Larry Frederick. And it said, "Larry Frederick rides cross country with his son, who's 15, to give thanks for donating blood." Kind of the side story is Larry was an LA police officer who had pulled over somebody and got hit by a car. He had 110 units of blood transfused through the night, died a couple of times on the table. His wife was pregnant with their son at the time. So he learned to crawl with his son. Then eventually they rode bikes together. And so Larry, in this Bicycle magazine, I'm reading this article about how Larry had ridden cross country in 95 with his son. And there's predetermined routes all across the US for cyclists, but he had mapped it out to where each stop was with a blood center. And so he would stop and give
Right.
speeches and thanks for donating blood
Yeah.
because he had 110 units of blood transfused. And they ended up at the White House and had dinner with the president because it made such national news because his son was only
Wow.
15. And so I read this article and I'm like, that's going to have a lot of meaning one day. So that's a pretty cool article. So I put it on the bulletin board. And then the other one was I read some quote that we'll get to later that I was like, that right there is incredible. That's going to have a lot of meaning one day. And so I took it out and put it on the bulletin board too. So two articles, my Rocky bulletin board, right? Not knowing that I too would become one of those stories. And so I kind of hit the valley in April of 17, and I open up USA Today, and on the front page, this guy that I'd read about the day of my plane crash, I put on my bulletin board, is on the front page of USA Today, and it says, "First ever 5 points of life ride to honor those who gave, organ tissue, blood, aphereses, cord cell blood is being led cross country. Life South Community Blood Centers is being led by Larry Frederick." And I'm like, here's the guy that on the day of my crash that I was like, this is incredible. Now he's right there. So I was like, I've got to meet this guy. And we looked at his route, and they were coming north of where we live in the northern part of Alabama. And my sister, she's a battle axe. I mean, she's awesome. She took up on herself to call Life South Community Blood Centers, who put her in with State Farm and, all these other people that were sponsors. And they said, yeah, we have guest riders all the time come up and ride with us. We'd love to have them. And so, you know, throw a backpack with some change of clothes and rent a car and my bike and drive up and walk in. And I'm like, hey, I'm Scott Christmas. I'd like to ride with you. And they're like, come on. And everybody that was a sponsored rider, there was 15 of them. They all had some association, whether it's
Yeah.
a loved one that needed transfusions or somebody that gave cord cell blood from their child that, died in stillbirth, leukemia patient. But from a traumatic standpoint, Larry was the impact. He had that traumatic injury.
Hmm.
And so he and I connected immediately. I mean, to watch him walk across, a room, you'd be like, oh my God, his legs were just shredded. But he'd get on a bike and he'd just motor. We'd sit up every night and, we'd talk about the journey from not just a physical standpoint, but from an emotional standpoint.
Yeah.
And like Larry said, you have the stages of grief, right? And Larry he was depressed for a long time. And so I started riding with them. And then somewhere along the way, we were at a Coca-Cola plant in Montgomery, and I was only going to ride 4 or 5 days with him, then break off and come back to work. And he said, "Hey, we've had a unique guest," and he said, "Why don't you come up and tell him your story?" And never been a public speaker before, never gotten up in front of taking, talk to people like that. And I said, "What do I say, Larry?" He said, "You just tell them your story." He goes, "That's all we're doing. We're telling our story. We're spreading a message of hope." My favorite word. And so I got up there and told my story. And so they had, all the cycling kits, with all the sponsors and everything. But I kept on asking them, can I have one of those jerseys? Can I have one of those jerseys? And they're like, nope, it's, for sponsored riders only. I'm like, okay. So I broke off in Atlanta, Georgia. And I got back to work and, they wanted me to stay. And I was like, I can't, guys, I can't take that much time off. And I work for a good friend of mine. And he said, man, go. And so I called him up and they said, look, we'll take you out the last day and dump you off, the 100-mile ride in to the grand finale. So we're going to let you surprise them. And so I came out there and they dumped you off. And every time you came into a big city, you'd have police escorts, media all around the events. And so we rode into the final event and, Nancy Eckhart, who was the CEO, she got up there and started talking. I'm sitting in the crowd and she said, this was the first ever 5 points of life ride. We're going to do it. It was such a huge success. And they read off, how many donor cards they had, how many units of blood were transfused. And she said, with that being said, we're going to do it again in 1998. And Larry has said that he needs a break. His body, it's too much, on him. And so with that being said, we've had lots of wonderful stories. While going across, I always get choked up on this, but I don't know why. I just always do. She goes, we've had lots of wonderful stories across the country, but one story in particular stood out more than all the others. And with that, she started telling my story. And she said, with that, we'd like to ask Scott Christmas to ride up on stage and present you with this jersey and ask you to lead us across country in 98. And I mean, it just, it destroys me. I don't know why to this day he's still telling that story. So in 1998, I had the honor of, leading 12 of us across country. And, um, it was magical. I mean, and it was truly life changing to me. And in a way, for me, when my buddy was hopscotching cross country doing his passion,
Yeah.
flying, and then for me, my passion, cycling. And so, in a way, I completed his journey, across
Yeah.
the country. So, to look at it that way. Um, so, yeah. So, and then and along the way, to kind of back up a little bit, when I came back from that, short stint with them, you know, I had more hope. I just did. I had a drive. I'm like, this is what I'm meant to be doing. I'm meant to be an endurance athlete. I'm meant to get out there and spread my message. And I remember we finished a ride one day, and two of my dear friends, Gabe and Hop Chamberlain. Afterwards, we sat down and we're sitting on the steps, and they were about to go run, and he leaned over and put his arm on my knee, and he said, his hand on his knee. He's like, "Why don't you go get your running shoes?" And I'm like, "Ah, man, I'm scared." And he's like, "You go get them." And we just did just one block around the neighborhood, and
Wow.
and that kind of changed. And so then I'd set my sights on that. I was like, you know what? I'm going to try this. I'm not going to tell anybody. I'm just going to start training.
You're
And
right.
so I started running, and we had a little local legend race here in Sandestin, Florida, called the Elephant Walk Triathlon. And 13 months after the crash, I'd signed up for it, and I just wanted to keep it kind of quiet. My friends knew, obviously. So I signed up, and my sister kind of got wind of it. And like I said, she's a battle axe. And I showed up at packet pickup, and you can feel a buzz, something's different, people looking at you, and then I see a newspaper article, and it's got my picture from the race before, and it says, "Come back, kid," doing his first triathlon. And so my dad had been a race director for a local 10K here that was the largest 10K in the nation at the time, and the vice president of the Roadrunners Club of America. So he was dialed in, and I came out of the water, and he's got T-shirts made that on the front has the same picture, and on the back it, said "Come back, kid," and it said on the back it said "We believe in miracles." So it was magical, and it was the first race I ever did on my custom triathlon bike, and so it's something I've done every ride since then, and every race since then at the turnaround or wherever the halfway point. I always kind of whisper out loud, "Okay, Dukester, take me home." So still do it to this day, and my sister says, "Well, the awards are about to start." And I used to place in that race, and I was like, I don't need to come down for that. I didn't place. And she's like, "Just come down." And for whatever reason, everybody was hanging out. I was just hundreds and hundreds of people, and the race director got up there and said, "Look, as y'all know, we've had something pretty special happen here today." And he started telling my story, and he said, "We'd like to give out the first ever Scott Christmas Comeback Award, which will be given out every year from here on in his honor to somebody who's overcome, something horrible that's happened to him."
It's just amazing how, despite all that you went through, sport again, triathlon again saved your life, but actually you're now using it to give you used it to give so many others hope and to pull
Yeah.
them through. It's just so inspiring. And I want to jump forward now because lots of things that have also influenced where you're going now and what you're doing. But this year it's the 30th anniversary of the crash, isn't it? And so you are going for, we kind of touched on it earlier, you're going for a very big event this year to keep your promise that you made back in the hospital. Um, do you want to just share what that race is and what you're hoping to achieve?
So, kept the first promise to return to racing. Obviously, you heard that. The second promise, we did the Marine Corps Marathon in 2002,
Wow.
and then we did it again on the 20th anniversary. Now fast forward to how we got to Ironman. So my third promise, I was never going to be fast enough to qualify. Back in the day, you could do the lottery. That went away. I was never going to be one of those guys that would do 13 full Ironmans. I'd done my first full Ironman in '01 at Oceanside, the last year that it was a full. And it was put on at Camp Pendleton. So that was pretty meaningful because Wynn had been out there for a while, stationed. And so to be there supported on the ride. And then I'd done my second full Ironman in 14 in Texas. And along the way, I met my wife Amy in 2006, and we got married. Blended family, 3 kids. Amy was from Texas, Texas girls, they warm your heart. They're Houston, and gone to med school in Houston at UT McGovern and become an ophthalmologist, an eye doctor of all things. So I was like, who is this girl? She is beautiful. I mean, she's super
Oh,
fit, big runner. I mean, like six pack, and he said, who is she? And he told me, and he said, yes, she's single. He's like, I should set you up on an eye doctor appointment. You haven't had your eye checked out in years. You need to come back in. And so he set me up an eye doctor appointment, and I went in and had to cancel several times because of surgery. And she was right just then. She was about to fire me as a patient. And so I finally showed up, and there's nothing you can do with my eye. So I walked in and, with the whole plan of, hey, you want to go run one day or something like that. And she came, bebopping in, and she looked more like a pharmaceutical rep. She was just gorgeous. And, and I said, everything okay? And she said, well, she goes, my last patient, he brought his daughter in to ask me out on a date. And I said, oh, does that happen a lot? She goes, it seems to more and more lately. And I'm like, okay, well, I've got
oh
to go
no.
to plan B here real quick. And so we started talking about my eye, and she thought it was cool and funky. And then we eventually, went out. I saw her at the gym, and told her that I was actually there to ask her out on a date and see if she wanted to go running one day. She's like, I would have loved that. And so we ended up going for a
Oh,
run, and started dating and got married, a couple of years later. And she got into Ironmans and triathlons. And um, so then, here we are yet again. So I've had the eye accident, recovered from that, and then the plane crash accident happens. And then, next thing I meet my wife, love of my life, and just a happy, we're racing together. And kind of given up on Hawaii. And if you don't mind me telling the Amy story, I will.
no, no, no.
Um, so it kind of, the journey to where I am now went off the rails. And December of 15, Amy started having double vision and a downward left gaze. And having now been married to an ophthalmologist, that's usually indicative of, a head injury when you're younger. And so Amy went off. We went back to Houston to see if, doctors over here, they always go out of town and get somebody else to look at them. So they keep it off, the radar from everybody. And so we went back to Houston where she trained, and they said, yeah, it's probably a fourth nerve palsy. You need muscle realignment. So we came back and went to her old partner, Dr. Ritt, and he was kind of her, her father in medicine. I mean, he took care of her, and he said, yeah, it looks like a fourth nerve palsy, but, always do an MRI. And so, we did an MRI, and he's like, not that we're going to find anything. And she had something show up on the left lobe, and it was a pretty big mass. And that was 3 days before Christmas. And so he said, first thing we need to do is get contrast in there. And what they do is they put you in MRI, and they put, fluid in there to light up anything. And it
Yeah.
didn't enhance. So it didn't look like an atypical tumor. So they really thought it was, an atypical MS lesion. And so we got through Christmas. Then after that, we started chasing it at New Orleans at Ochsner. Um, and with an MS specialist, neurosurgeons, everybody was looking at it. Nobody thought it was a tumor. And so we started chasing it. And I mean, every month we were repeat scans, and then you'd have the high of nothing's changed, we're good. And then you try and go back to a normal life for 3 or 4 weeks, and then go back and start the whole process over again. Um, and Amy being a physician, she had tentacles throughout the country as well. So we had access to some of the best of the best. And at that point, we had not had it biopsied. And then finally, people were some of my friends that were neurosurgeons were like, I can't believe she's not having aphasia. And left lobe is speech.
Yeah.
And Amy was so smart that, I mean, she was still running all the time, doing races, and but just constant headaches and double vision and repeat scans. And eventually the decision was made to do a biopsy. And the biopsy came back as a grade 2 diffused astrocytoma. And in the brain, in the tumor world of the brain, that's, it's a glia is what it's called. And it's usually so diffused. It's, a lot of tumors are encapsulated in their own little pocket. This one was all snaked through the good tissue. So it wasn't resectable. So the gold standard is to watch and wait, and every 6 months repeat scans unless size or symptoms change. And So, we had almost gotten into Ironman before that. Now we're dealing with this, and so I'd kind of just put that aside, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I've got my wife who's sick and we don't know what's going on. But then about a month before her 6-month follow up, she had a grand mal seizure. And the ensuing scan showed that she had the tumor had doubled in size and crossed midline. Textbook will tell you any tumor that crosses midline in your brain, it's the end game. I mean, it's statistically you've got 18 to 24 months. So at that point, we knew we were in the fight for our life. And so then, we're accelerating things. We're getting in front of the right people. You know, Amy having been in Houston, and grown up there and trained there, and we had access to everybody. And, I can still remember sitting in the car. She said, when she trained there, she said the one thing she did every night when she went home was she said a prayer that none of her family or friends would ever end up there, nor herself. And then, we walk in. I can still remember it like it was yesterday. Amy always held my right hand. I held her left hand because I'm blind in my, left eye. That's where she stayed. And right before those double doors opened up to Indy Anderson, she squeezed my hand, tight. With the doors opened up, and walking towards us is a couple about our same age, holding hands the same way. The girl, though, she's in a hospital gown, pushing a pole, and she looks like, she just stepped out of concentration camp. She's a shell of a human being. And we made eye contact and we squeezed each other's hands a little bit tighter, and everything went into slow motion. And, it was, looking back now, how prophetic is that? It was like we were watching the future come towards us. We were watching ourselves. So, it was inoperable. We started chemo and radiation pretty heavy for about 4 months. We'd spend our mornings doing radiation and go run or walk in the park afterwards. And eventually, she had the all the weight gain from the steroids that you have to take for that, the hair loss. And, to watch, you know, I guess I tell people it's a humbling experience from my standpoint. I'm the patient that's survived every, you know, I'm the guy on the Titanic that's, hey guys, it's going to be a cold swim, but we got this. And then here we are faced with something that, you're not going to get out of. And, but to watch the physician become the patient
Yeah.
is a hard thing to watch. And to watch somebody that's, 40, just turned 45, go through that is a tough thing. And, so we came home after she completed chemo and radiation, came home, eventually started having so many breakthrough seizures. Then she lost her right side, almost like a stroke victim. And then she was just, we had home health come PT, and they said, I think she has a PE. So we took her to our primary care, and they did an ultrasound, and she was just littered with PEs. And so much so that they didn't realize how she even made it there without throwing one and, killing her. And so we took her to the hospital, and, they came in and said, I don't know if she's going to make it through the night. And so the decision was made to bring her home. And so we had her at home for about 2 weeks on hospice. And then, September 24th, 2017, God called her home, and she crossed her greatest and final finish line. And her nickname was the Runner Girl. So my Runner Girl got her wings. And and I tell people that it's one thing to watch the love of your life take their last breath. Uh, it's another thing to go wake up the kids and tell them mom's going to heaven. I mean, how do you it's one thing as an adult, but how does a child wrap their mind around that? And you know, uh, I guess in going down that story, here I was, the hopeful one, and and that hope's ripped away again. People ask me all the time, how do you wrap your mind around, the eye accident? That's just personal. And, you're losing your best friend on being there, and then
No.
watch your wife. I mean, it's a lot.
No, and I was just gonna say, the bar kind of incident, the plane crash, I mean, you that was kind of centered around you, and you had that fight and that battle.
Hmm.
I'm gonna get up, I'm gonna get going, I'm gonna get on my bike, I'm gonna run. Whereas with your wife, like, you're just watching somebody, there's nothing you can do other than just be there for her, and that's a different way of kind of having to deal with it, isn't it? And
Mhm.
I imagine
It's
at
a
that.
helpless feeling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that and
Yeah.
that hope that you has been your kind of motto and your focus and your favorite word.
Mhm.
When there isn't that hope gone, I mean, it's shattering, isn't it? It's a different kind of approach from it.
It is. And, and I tell people, so, I give talks, and, you had somebody on the panel that, lost their husband. She was older to memory care. But I told the audience, I said, anybody who's been through something like what I've been through, you survive the funeral. You just do. That's all it is. You are surviving it. It's a fast moving train.
Mhm.
The hard part is when everybody goes on to life and life continues as it should, and you're left there with the silence. When the silence shows up, that's the hard part. And that's your new reality. And it's like a secret that nobody else knows, and you don't want to know it. And so, the one thing I can tell people is that the sun will rise again. I mean, it will. I mean, it's not always easy, and looking at what happened to Win and then to my wife Amy, I was there when both of them took their last breath. One was trapped underwater, the other one was in our bedroom. Um, you know, Both traumatic and horrific in their own ways, but both were a gift. I think. I mean, they were a gift to me. That I was the last one there. And they'll be the first people that I see when I take my last breath. Uh, that's kind of how I make my peace with it. I do think that there is a reason God kept me around.
Yeah, yeah,
And I have to believe that. And I have to believe that maybe that is to keep their memories alive, to let our kids know that the sun will rise again, to, maybe touch the life of somebody else who's in a dark place and they'll realize that, hey, the sun will rise again. I mean, triathlon's unique in that, there's 1,000 stories out there to race. I
of
mean, we're
course,
all just a
yeah.
conglomerate of stories,
Yeah,
and some you don't. And everybody's, fighting their own battle, but everybody's got one thing in common, and that's to get to that line.
yeah,
And so that's what I love about it. I mean, how many times have you been in a race when you see the guy walking and somebody you don't even know, you walk up, come on, buddy, you got it, and they start
yeah.
running again, and they pass it forward to you.
It
Yeah.
does, and it just shows how resilient and strong you are because despite of everything that you've been through, you can still take that positive of how lucky you were to be kind of the last person that they saw and to be that hope for your children and for, inspiring other people who are potentially
Mhm.
going through loss or trauma is just incredible. And I know you've spoken kind of quite openly, obviously, how you went through a real dip after everything that happened. And is it right that one of your contacts, one of your friends, reminded you that it was the 30th anniversary coming up, and that helped kickstart you back into training?
I'd still been doing half Ironmans for a while.
Right.
So, with Amy, um, obviously I stopped that then. Her sister, both of them were big marathoners in Houston. And so we ran the Houston Marathon for Amy in January of 18. And then I started getting back into it, right? I started racing again. And that was kind of my therapy. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm one of those guys, put me on a bike for 6 hours alone. I'm in heaven. I mean, that's my comfort zone. Well, then fast forward, I'd given up on Kona, hadn't even distant thought, had signed up for the Marine Corps Marathon this year, which is at the end of October for the 30th. And I was like, you know what? That'll be my final box. Last time I'm going to go to Arlington. My daughter's supposed to run it with me. And then I was going to, that's how I was going to close out this chapter, And so back in May, when Ironman announced that they were going back to the Big Island for the World Championship, a good friend of mine, Philip Lahaye, who had kind of risen the ranks in Ironman, and he reached out to me and said, did you see that they moved the championship to the Big Island? And he's like, 30th anniversary, isn't it? And I was like, it is. I was like, and he's like, because he was here racing with me at the time. And he goes, you ready to keep that third promise? And I'm like, "Whoa, what are you talking about?" And he's like, look, you're about to get a phone call from the foundation. I've been telling them your story. They're interested in you being their main athlete in the foundation story this year. And so, I mean, when he told me that, and then I talked to Audra, and to be honest, I mean, for a month or two. Anytime I would tell that, I'd just start, boo-hooing that it's actually a reality.
Yeah.
And so here it is. Fast approaching in what, 90 to less than 100 days. And now I'll be racing Kona. And the plan is now on October 10th, I'll go over and do the Ironman and then fly back with that medal, run with it 2 weeks later in the Marine Corps Marathon, and then take both over and, you know, you know, give one final salute till they come pick me up is kind of my plan. So yeah, it'll be a big emotional day. So,
It will. I
yeah,
mean, it's getting
yeah.
me emotional here. Just, the opportunity that you have to be able to go and do that. And for people who don't know, it's through the Ironman Foundation, who do some incredible work, not just giving hope to athletes like myself, but also you as well. But they do a lot of incredible work fundraising to give hope to children. So giving them bikes to help them on their journey, swim lessons as well. And so, obviously the
And
Ironman Foundation, kind of they're helping you get down that finish line, which will be such an incredible thing. But what was it about the foundation that was also so special to you?
so that's just it. My story's greater than me. It's God's story. I'm just the vessel that's carrying it for him, that he's chosen. And I can make it all about myself. It's obviously me keeping a promise that I've been 30 years in in the hunt for. But it's bigger than me. And my story's always been bigger than me. And to be able to team up with the foundation that does so many good things. Like I said, hope is my favorite word in the whole wide world. And then, but to have an opportunity to go over there and just do it by myself, it wouldn't have a fraction of the meaning that it would than doing it with the foundation. But now I have an opportunity to use my favorite word, hope, right? But if I can get out there and spread the message of hope for other athletes, but then also team up with the foundation and raise funds for their organization, which is what they do. Just like me getting back on the bike at 26, after a plane crash, that was the greatest freedom that you could ever give me. But to be able to go to, an underprivileged community and give somebody that vehicle that will take them through their life or give them a sense of hope and, a whole avenue in life or, swim lessons for kids. I'm not just spreading a message of hope. We're helping fund a message of hope for these communities. And who knows where those things are going to go. There's a lifeguard in Chattanooga who he couldn't swim, and now he's the head lifeguard and giving swim lessons. To me, that's where the foundation is everything in this whole story. I'm just another page in the book that's being turned.
No.
So
But it does make it even more special, doesn't it? Knowing that not only are you going to complete that final challenge that you set yourself,
yeah,
but also doing it to support other people just makes it even more special. So a big
it
thank
does,
you.
and the kids. Kids are
Yeah.
so. It's the innocence of them, right? I don't know your background. I know my background. I was pretty lucky in the family that I grew up. Some of these kids are foster kids or, around the world. Africa, they're giving them bicycles. Well, what a great thing is endurance athletes. If we can give back, we go into communities and, we take over these cities and to be able to give back to those communities that are so, generous to let us use their roads and their waterways and, their time and their people. And, to be able to give back to those communities by raising funds, that's a very positive impact. And if you can spread some positivity in somebody's life, just that little glimmer of hope, that's a wonderful thing. Whether, it's your favorite word or not, that's all we're doing out there is we're giving each other hope, and trying to get to the line. And now through the foundation, we're giving them hope to get to their line. And their line may just be being able to ride to school or, being able to be around a pool and not be scared that they're going to fall in and drown. And, like I said, I'm just a messenger and a vessel for that story. And, God put me in this place for a reason. And, to team up with Iron Man and the foundation for me it's fantastic. I love it. Asking people for money is not a comfortable thing. It's just not. Uh, but if it's for such a good cause, um, that's it makes it a little easier. Anything can help for the foundation, and they do such good work in the communities around the world.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so to
Um,
be able to team up with them it's been a godsend to me.
yeah.
So
It makes it even more meaningful, and I cannot wait to follow your journey to the finish line and watch you cross that finish line in October. And for anybody who's watching, how can they follow your journey and find out more about what you're doing?
So on Instagram, I'm Scott Ironman Christmas. Geez, I know, but and then on Facebook, I'm Scott Christmas. It's a public page, and I kind of write my stories on there. It's a preview to my book that I'm writing, and hopefully finish it soon. It's called A Place Called Hope. It's my favorite word. It's totally true except for the last 5 pages, but really on Facebook and Instagram, and then
Mhm.
the foundation's page.
Yeah,
So is where you can follow me and where people can donate if they want to my fund or just donate to the foundation. But more than anything, follow the journey and see the good that the foundation does. Not just me, that I'm one of many athletes, some wonderful, wonderful athletes that the foundation's teamed up with. And there's a lot of great stories out there, everybody's spreading the message of hope, whether that's what they think they're doing or not. So,
yeah, absolutely, and
yeah.
it's where this
Yeah.
this podcast was born, with all of those messages there. So we'll share your handles when we put the podcast live, so that we can hopefully get that message out. And I just want to say a huge, huge thank you for your time today, just sharing your story, because it's so refreshing to hear all the trauma that you've been through, but how you are remaining so positive through that, and keeping that message of hope going. And I definitely need to take some of that positivity away and remember it when I'm finding things tough. So Scott, thank you so much for your time. I wish you all the best for October, and I cannot wait to see you with those 2 medals at the end of October.
Well, thank you so much, Jen. It was fantastic. I enjoyed it. You made my day.